Thank you. Hello, I'm Simon Longstaff from the Ethics Centre, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight to Sydney's City Recital Hall in Angel Place for the latest Intelligence Squared debate to come from Australia. Before we proceed, what I'd like to do is to pay my respects, and I hope on your behalf as well, our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, to acknowledge their elders past and present. We've come here tonight to debate whether racism is destroying the Australian dream. Speaking for the motion will be Stan Grant. Stan, if I can introduce him, is a journalist and a news anchor. He's an Aboriginal Australian descending from the Wiradjuri people of central New South Wales, where his father is an elder. Stan has recently published a series of pieces on the Aboriginal experience of racism. Speaking in the debate that racism is undermining the Australian dream, please welcome Stan Grant.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming along this evening, and I would also like to extend my respects to my Gadigal brothers and sisters from my people, the Wiradjuri people. In the winter of 2015, Australia turned to face itself. It looked into its soul and it had to ask this question: who are we? What sort of country do we want to be? And this happened in a place that is most holy, most sacred to Australians. It happened in the sporting field, it happened on the football field. Suddenly the front page was on the back page, it was in the grandstands. Thousands of voices rose to hound an Indigenous man, a man who was told he was an Australian, a man who was told he was an Australian of the Year. And they hounded that man into submission. I can't speak for what lay in the hearts of the people who booed Adam Goodes, but I can tell you what we heard when we heard those boos. We heard a sound that was very familiar to us. We heard a howl. We heard a howl of humiliation that echoes across 2 centuries of dispossession, injustice, suffering, and survival. We heard the howl of the Australian dream, and it said to us again, "You're not welcome." The Australian dream. We sing of it and we recite it in verse. Australians all, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. My people die young in this country. We die 10 years younger than average Australians, and we are far from free. We are fewer than 3% of the Australian population, and yet we are 25%, a quarter of those Australians, locked up in our prisons. And if you are a juvenile, it is worse, it is 50%. An Indigenous child is more likely to be locked up in prison than they are to finish high school. I come from a people west of the Blue Mountains, the Wiradjuri people, where in the 1820s, the soldiers and settlers waged a war of extermination against my people. Yes, a war of extermination. That was the language used at the time. Go to the Sydney Gazette and look it up and read about it. Martial law was declared and my people could be shot on sight. Those rugged mountain ranges, my people, women and children, were herded over those ranges to their deaths. The Australian dream. The Australian dream is rooted in racism. It is the very foundation of the dream. It is there at the birth of the nation. It is there in terra nullius, an empty land, a land for the taking. And when British people looked at us, they saw something subhuman, and if we were human at all, we occupied the lowest rung on civilization's ladder. We were fly-blown Stone Age savages, and that was the language that was used. By 1901, when we became a nation, when we federated the colonies, we were nowhere. We're not in the Constitution, save for race provisions, which allowed for laws to be made that would take our children, that would invade our privacy, that would tell us who we could marry and tell us where we could live, the Australian dream. In 1963, when I was born, I was counted among the flora and fauna, not among the citizens of this country. Now, you will hear things tonight, you will hear people say, but you've done well. Yes, I have, and I'm proud of it. And why have I done well? I've done well because of who has come before me. My grandfather, who served to fight wars for this country when he was not yet a citizen and came back to a segregated land where he couldn't even share a drink with his digger mates in the pub because he was black. My great-grandfather, who was jailed for speaking his language to his grandson, my father, jailed for it. That's the Australian dream. I have succeeded in spite of the Australian dream, not because of it, and I've succeeded because of those people. You might hear tonight, but you have white blood in you, and if the white blood in me was here tonight, my grandmother, she would tell you of how she was turned away from a hospital giving birth to her first child because she was giving birth to the child of a black person. The Australian dream. We're better than this. We are an extraordinary country. We are, in so many respects, the envy of the world. If I was sitting here where my friends are tonight, I would be arguing passionately for this country. But I stand here with my ancestors, and the view looks very different from where I stand. The Australian dream. We have our heroes. Kathy Freeman lit the torch for the Olympic Games, but every time we are lured into the light, we are mugged by the darkness of this country's history. Of course racism is killing the Australian dream. It is self-evident that it's killing the Australian dream. But we are better than that. The people who marched across the bridge for reconciliation, they are better than that. The people who supported Kevin Rudd when he said sorry to the stolen generations, they are better than that. My children and their non-Indigenous friends are better than that. My wife, who is non-Indigenous, is better than that. And one day I want to stand here and be able to say as proudly and sing as loudly as anyone else in this room, Australians all, let us rejoice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stan. Jack Thompson's a celebrated Australian film icon, an actor born in Sydney, who is known for what many consider to be his portrayal of the quintessentially Aussie character in movies like The Man from Snowy River and, of course, Wake in Fright. Please welcome Jack Thompson.
I have listened to what's been said passionately about the racism in our society. Let's examine this concept of an Australian dream. The Indigenous dream that was being lived when we arrived here was almost totally destroyed by our arrival. And Stan has presented eloquent evidence of just what that meant. We have been racist from very early. But what Stan didn't mention was that that racism was already inherent in us. It was what brought a lot of us here. Every time you hear an Irish joke, that's a racist joke. It's a joke at the expense of the Celts, who were considered so inferior to the Anglo-Saxon that from around 1750 through, even right through to 1900, there was an incredible diaspora of the Celtic people from the British Isles. They were less than. They were the result of an institutionalized and rationally argued racism. But this dream that we speak of is in fact itself a racist dream. You can be a part of us, this wonderful world in which I'll let you be equal, brother. I remember growing up with evidence of this racism that I inherited, this empire that I was a part of. It's our history. It's who we are. We are living a denial of our history. We are living a denial of the racism that is inherent in our lives. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you were made welcome. Yes, Treaty, you were given a wonderful opportunity. And yes, Stan, we have been involved in great racial atrocities. We learned that from those who came before us and who handed it on in nursery rhyme and attitude, and then said it must not be spoken of. It isn't racism that's ruining whatever Australian dream there may be. And as I said, I suggest that dream itself is a racist dream. It is that censorship. It is that denial. And as Paladin said, the subject of the debate is quite definite, quite narrow. Is racism destroying the Australian dream? It's not racism. It's our denial of that endemic and institutionalized racism. And until we teach our children the history of who we are, that dream is not really possible. And they will be denied a future in which they can honestly say, there is an Australian dream, and I'm part of it.